everybody. This is Bill Taranto. I'm president of Merck Global Health Innovation Fund, and I'm excited to speak to you all today, as well as our guest, Sadeq Ali, and he's co-founder and COO of AccurKardia. And so we're going to get a real good understanding of the company and his background today. So Sadeq, welcome to the show today. So first off, we have a really broad audience of investors. We have students, we have entrepreneurs. Can you tell me your career journey? How did you start your career? How did you get in healthcare? And then how did you be co-founder and COO of AccurKardia?
Thanks first off, Bill, and thank you, Stan, for inviting me to this. So yeah, that's a very it's an interesting question because it wasn't necessarily a very sort of straightforward journey in some ways. I started my career as a consultant at Accenture, where I worked for, I'd say, for the best part of a decade, right after getting a computer engineering degree. I then went into Columbia to get my MBA in the late 2000s. And after that, I ended up working at Accenture for a bit more, but I really wanted to do my own thing. So I'd say starting in early 2010, I took the entrepreneurial plunge, and effectively, if you count chronologically, AccurKardia is my fifth company, essentially. The first one was, as it is the case with many entrepreneurs, not very successful. I ended up running it for about 4 years before it was clear that it was running me more than the other way around, and I wasn't necessarily running it very well. So essentially, that first company folded in 2014. After that, I more successfully launched a few other ventures, and AccurKardia effectively almost came about by accident. I was in Bangalore, India, at that point, going back and forth between New York and Bangalore because I was living in New York and my kids and wife were in Bangalore. The kids were studying there, and I met a scientist who at that point was working on leveraging AI in some very interesting ways to look at ECG data. And the idea, as well as the approach that he was taking to analyze the data, seemed very appealing to me. I come from a healthcare family of sorts, so we go back maybe a century or longer in terms of having doctors in the family. My own father, my aunt, all of them are doctors. In many ways, I was sort of the black sheep of the family, not having gone into medicine. But when this opportunity came about, it just seemed almost fateful in some sense that, after doing everything that I did, I was coming a full circle back into healthcare and doing something that was very interesting in the cardiology space that could make a difference in some ways in a much more scalable way than simply being, no disrespect towards that, but in terms of the scale that you can get through technology. It is just a lot larger if you are able to do so successfully than if you were in medicine as a doctor individually. So from that point of view, the opportunity seemed interesting. The technology seemed novel, and the application of it in the context of ECG, which we believe in some ways being one of the key biomarkers that an individual possesses. It just seemed to make sense to start digging into it and start investigating it as an opportunity to build a company around. So honestly, I got involved before AccurKardia was a company, helped form the company and have been involved really from day one, which at this point goes back to mid 2018 through the early 2019 time period.
Well, great. That's a great journey. So let's talk specifically about the company. So what I like, it's kind of a two-part question. Can you tell the audience, what is AccurKardia about? What are you trying to accomplish? And then what are some of your products that you have established that help you, meet the mission that you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, at AccurKardia, at a very high level, what we are essentially doing is leveraging the ECG signal to run a wide variety of diagnostics. Our initial sort of foundational product is something called AccurECG, which leverages the ECG signal for a very traditional use case, which is arrhythmia detection and diagnosis. And that particular product is the one that recently received FDA approval. That's the one that we are furthest along in terms of commercialization. Alongside that, over the years, we've also become strong proponents of the idea that there's a lot of interesting data in the ECG signal, both from the respect of wider cardiology as well as outside of cardiology. So we're developing products in nephrology, for example, that enable you to detect hyperkalemia, which is high potassium levels in the blood through ECG. And we believe, like similar to hyperkalemia, there are a lot of other things that the ECG signal can also reveal. And our goal as a company is to build algorithms that can detect those diseases or those potential diseases, and leverage that to essentially become a biomarker of sorts that can be used in all sorts of different contexts, including telehealth.
Great. So let's talk about now the patient, the physician. How does the patient then benefit, and then how does the physician administer the AccurKardia products?
Yeah, so AccurKardia works behind the scenes in many ways. So from the point of view of a physician, or definitely from the point of view of the patient, they may not even know that it's AccurKardia doing the analytics behind the scenes. So our business model is very much in the context of licensing our software and our algorithms, either through licensing deals, allowing them to access it through an API in the back end, and from that, and we basically integrate with device manufacturers that then leverage our analytics in the context of their solutions, right? So we are in many ways powering the solutions of, say, ambulatory Holter manufacturers, right? So the best way to think about it would be like Intel Inside, right? Like we don't necessarily interact directly with the end user of our product, but our product is powering the analytics, or hopefully will be powering the analytics as we're just starting to commercialize in the context of things like arrhythmia detection, for example, for Holter companies. And similarly for other use cases, we will integrate may integrate with the HR systems, etc. But it isn't going to be direct to consumer or even direct to physician.
Okay, so a typical monitoring company would call you to be the back end sort of analytics component, or at least say another piece of the back end.
Another piece of it is more likely because they have some of their own analytics and software as well. Like what we would be doing are areas where they may not necessarily be performing as well. It could be for a specific arrhythmia, it could be for ectopic, certain areas where they need enhanced analytics beyond what they already have, or perhaps in some cases they want multiple viewpoints on the same report, right? So they would be integrating with us to get that information back into their solutions.
Okay, great. If you think of digital health, what are some of the challenges you see in trying to bring your product to market, overall in this sort of digital market that we have today?
There are several. I mean, I think from our perspective, the two sort of major ones are one, the minute you decide as a company you're going to do something that's truly clinical, you have to agree within the team and as a venture that you are going to go through the regulatory pathway. And the regulatory pathway, particularly for any devices that use more advanced analytics and AI, etc., within the context of their solutions, that is still very much in the process of viewpoints developing. While a lot has been done from the point of view of the regulatory agencies around the world, it is still a developing space. It isn't, every day the agencies are getting smarter about it, and they're providing better and better guidance in terms of how a company like ours needs to operate, and how it needs to build its initial models, validate its initial models, but then also how it evolves those models over time. So I think from that perspective, the regulatory pathway for a clinical device is one of the challenges. And frankly, it is one of those challenges that I think is there for the benefit of everyone, but it is nonetheless a challenge that needs to be understood and worked through. The other major one, particularly given healthcare, is the ability to get access to high quality data sets. ideally horizontal data sets or longitudinal data sets over time. And that can be challenging as well because, even if you get access to data sets, one of the challenges we've had, for example, is just because a certain data set, let's say an ECG signal, is annotated a certain way, it doesn't necessarily mean that that initial annotation is correct. So when we ran a retrospective study for one of our core devices, we had to bring in a panel of cardiologists to re-annotate the data to make sure that they first agreed before our analytics was run against that. And that whole process, while painful, was very, very valuable and had to be done. But it's not always possible to bring in panels of cardiologists or nephrologists or whoever it might be to do that type of work. It becomes very, very cumbersome and difficult to beyond a certain point. So I think that's a major challenge that needs to be overcome, because a lot of times it's not just how, your machine performing or the AI performing well, but performing against whom and how well was that initial data captured and annotated that is also in question. So I think access to high quality data set with great annotation and ideally longitudinal data is also very useful, but very difficult to get in healthcare. At least for a startup. For certain larger organizations it might be easier, but for a startup, that's definitely a challenge.
Well, my last question is, because we have, we're working with the HITLAB, we have the Breakthrough Alliance and the Breakthrough One audience here. How are you working with HITLAB today?
Yeah, so we began our journey with HITLAB back in 2021. We engaged with HITLAB to do a study where we basically analyzed data from 12 lead ECG devices and compared it to data originating from the Apple Watch using our analytics engine. And we primarily studied something called a QT and QTC parameter for ECG monitoring, and it's a very specific parameter for various potential conditions that it can evolve. And from that perspective, HITLAB proved to be a great partner, both in terms of setting up the study, but then also in terms of executing the study all the way through to working with the principals to write the reports and everything and getting it distributed. So the entire life cycle of the research initiative. So similarly, now we're planning on future studies, both with the Apple Watch as well as potentially outside of the Apple Watch use case. But the way we've been working with HITLAB, frankly, is more on some of the more forward-looking stuff, as opposed to some of the core of what we've been doing on the ambulatory side of things, because specifically with HITLAB's focus being on digital health. And I think, ultimately where we want to go as well is the ability to get a lot of the value that we drive today through clinical grade devices onto consumer wearables and the likes. I think HITLAB is also well positioned to in some sense move towards that world, and that's where we see the best and overlap between what we are doing and what HITLAB provides.